Un attimino e parti.
Is this on?
Yep. Good afternoon, buon pomeriggio. Welcome again to our book presentation, to our first day of book presentation. So we're going to start with something really wonderful, as always, but we are particularly happy. Of course, you will find these books actually at our Filmfair upstairs, as some of you already know, and the one who doesn't, it's now they know, so they can escape. First of all, I want to thank both Maggie and Yiman to be here with us today and talking about something that, two books that you will see how related they are. So thank you again to both. And let's start with Maggie and That by Luther. So here we go. There you go. Okay, so Maggie, we were talking about, and that is also connected to your previous book that was presented here, the Giornate, the programming, and many, many, many things. We see That by Luther, though. Love is the main part and the main center of the book, and what that involves and how was used in a particular way.
Should I go?
Yes.
So, laughter. I feel like it would be helpful to start with a little bit of an origin story for this. First of all, thank you all for being here. I'm still recovering from the German film. So this will be a little bit of an affective pivot for those of us who are in the last screening. But I just, I wrote this book over the course of, I don't know, maybe over a decade. And the Pordenone community coming to this festival almost every year, being in conversation with this passionate community of people who care deeply about the archive and silent cinema, but also enjoy having fun and a good time, has been massively nourishing and really, really fueled the process of writing this book. But yeah, it started as a little bit of a spin-off from my first book, Spectres of Slapstick and Silent Film Comediennes, which is about women's extensive participation in the genres of slapstick comedy amid the emergence and popular explosion of early cinema in the late 19th and early 20th century. And in that book, I wanted to have a chapter on laughter, about women laughing hysterically at the movies in this kind of raucous public sphere of early cinema, in vaudeville houses, at the Nickelodeon. And I was finding all of these weird tidbits in the archive, just, advertising like, a woman, this show is so funny, a woman laughed so hard she broke her corset stave in the throes of hysterical laughter. And I was finding more and more material, and it was just way too much. It was completely not to be contained within the parameters of this first book on comedy. So it kind of spawned into a behemoth second monograph project of its own. But I was doing a postdoc at the University of Toronto in 2015, themed on humor, play, and games. And just kind of like cherry picking Lantern for anecdotes about women's laughter. I really wanted to understand what it felt like to be a woman at an early film screening, kind of laughing her head off in enjoyment in these kind of, bizarre slapstick comedies about a kitchen maid who spontaneously combusts out of the chimney, or who breaks all of the dishes in the kitchen in a fit of rage. And that's when I found my first obituary. I believe it was through Lantern. It might have been the World Newspaper Archive. It was something like, woman goes to a vaudeville show to see a comedy, ends up furnishing a tragedy instead because she laughs herself to death. And first of all, I couldn't believe it, right? Like that seemed like, oh yeah, so this is just gonna play on loop. There's may or may not be any correlation between what I'm saying and the particular slide on screen while I'm
sure
talking.
there is correlation.
It's, like maybe it will come to you during a dream later tonight. It's impossible to anticipate. So I found more and more of these obituaries, and they were kind of cruel. They're almost mocking the woman for having died in such an absurd and ridiculous way. Like one obituary comments that a woman laughed herself to death at a funny joke, but the joke itself couldn't be published in the obituary due to concerns about public safety. So, Another one, a woman laughed for 8 hours at a dentistry joke. Um, uh, but they eventually anesthetized her, so she didn't. In that case, her laughter wasn't fatal. But she had no memory of the incident the next day, and fortunately, no one repeated the joke or the punchline to her. If you're curious, I'll tell you the joke later, but not quite yet. We're not ready. We're not ready for the dentistry
yet.
joke. Yeah, but you see, like, here are some of the obituaries. Right, this is the one. Comedy performance fatal to Connecticut woman, and so on and so forth. So I'm finding all of these absurd obituaries. I eventually found hundreds of them. And I mean, one sort of physiological context for understanding the veracity of these obituaries, and I think they're kind of made up. They circulated in kind of tabloidy local newspapers. I read them as a sort of repressive discourse meant to terrify women into containing, silencing, and muffling their laughter, because the patriarchy freaked out that women were having so much fun at the movies and in these kind of raucous public spheres amid the emergence and rise of early cinema. These obituaries were meant to silence women pretty explicitly. At some point in this slideshow, there's an image of a woman tight lacing in a whalebone corset. So that is also really important physiological context for understanding what it felt like to be a female laugher circa, 1897, right? Imagine laughing uproariously with your rib cage trapped in a whalebone corset. At the very least, it sounds extremely uncomfortable, if not potentially lethal. So that was the initial, spark of inspiration for the book. I feel like this is when all new projects are formed. You find some bizarre artifact that you're intrigued and compelled by, but absolutely have no context for explaining. And, however many, 130,000 words later, I'm still extremely puzzled by these obituaries. But that was kind of the launching pad. It is a 3-part book. The first part is Death by Laughter, and it focuses more on the kind of cultural and materialist history of women's laughter amid the sort of invention and emergence of cinema. So I actually start just kind of by interrogating the euphemism of hysterical laughter, right? That's a phrase we still use frequently. It sounds pretty good. There's nothing better than laughing hysterically. It implies you're having a really delightful time. But circa the mid-19th century, hysterical laughter was actually the last thing you would ever want to experience with your body. To laugh hysterically meant basically to suffer a nervous breakdown. And it predominantly afflicted women, nervous, emotional, overly ambitious women whose ambitions kind of couldn't be contained by their social opportunities and outlets. And it was in particular caused by mixed feelings like despair and ambition, or joy and suffering, or hope and relief. Women suffered from mixed feelings, and it triggered their overwhelming hysterical laughter, which was in no way delightful or enjoyable, and completely unrelated to comedy. So I kind of work my way through this cultural etymology of hysterical laughter, which starts to take on connotations of fun and enjoyment around the end of the 19th century. So, right, overlapping with the invention and emergence of cinema. So hysterical laughter only becomes pleasurable in the context of kind of capitalist recreational mass culture. And then I weave my way through the death by laughter obituaries. I have a little bit of fun with Hélène Cixous's writing on the laugh of Medusa, which I actually got this t-shirt last summer in Athens, and I knew it was for me. And then I have a brief foray into going back to antiquity and the medieval folk festival. The Russian linguist Mikhail Bakhtin was obsessed with the history of death from joy, which he finds in Francois Rabelais' grotesque writings. So, and in modernist philosophy, a number of male modernist philosophers are also really intrigued by this kind of wager of laughing yourself to death as this sort of radical revolutionary practice of ego shattering that's meant to be sort of transformative to your subjectivity with massive political ramifications. But they don't talk about, I don't know, Bertha Pruitt or Barbara Barr, the woman who laughed for 8 hours at a dentistry joke. So that's part one. Part two is on hysteria. Also thinking about, so if the first book was about comedy, this book is really about laughter beyond comedy, particularly laughter that's sort of discarded as disproportionate, irrational, inappropriate in the context of its eruption. So I'm really interested in the sort of utopian potentials of the laughter that remains from the joke, that can't be, whose meaning can't be resolved through an analysis of comedy or a sort of dissection of the gag. I think that's the laughter that transcends, I don't know, all of our echo chambers today, all of our sort of flashpoints around, I don't know, culture war, cancel, comedy is only being a referendum on one's own identity and desire to have their identity represented through the in-jokes that they laugh at. I'm interested in laughter that transcends in-jokes or echo chambers, that just sort of spreads contagiously through the body politic. So part two is on hysteria, particularly looking at laughter as a kind of medical symptom, right? We think of the trope of the laughing mad woman. Sorry, 1 second. My mouth is getting very dry. What? Oh, there's Medusa. So part two is on hysteria. And I mean, the laughing mad woman is just almost a cliche when you think of the kind of 19th century history of clinical hysteria. Yet neurologists and psychologists, from Charcot to Breuer and Freud, who wrote about hysteria at the time, basically ignored laughter as a symptom, right? Because it was almost too obvious. So in psychoanalysis, laughter at jokes, according to Freud, joke laughter is layered with unconscious meaning, but laughter as a hysterical symptom is just sort of like an unremarkable tic or gesture. It doesn't get at the unconscious the way, I don't know, somnambulism or fugue states or hallucinations do. So laughter is kind of right under neurology's nose, but pretty much written out of the case studies. So I sort of go through the weeds of a lot of 19th century and early 20th century neurological writings on female hysteria. And of course, in Charcot's clinic, he paraded these neurodivergent women on stage in this massive theater in front of hundreds of medical peers and hypnotized them to have epileptic seizures in front of a live audience. And he frequently compared the hysterics, kind of superhuman physical gestures to the pratfalls of a circus clown. Charcot was actually a big fan of the circus and the music hall. And in fact, one phase of the hysterics epileptic attack, Charcot specifically described as clownisme or clownism. So in part two, I'm also really interested in these kind of historical convergences between clowning, laughter, and neurodivergence. So that's a big part of the midsection of the book. And then at the end of part two, I look at hysteria as a mass phenomenon, reading case histories of mob mentality, laughter as a sign of demonic possession, and kind of thinking about what it means when affect becomes contagious, from neurodivergent symptoms to, like uproarious comedic laughter. And then finally, 178 pages into the book, we arrive at cinema. But I really think the scaffolding is necessary for understanding what it meant to laugh hysterically as a film spectator, in the late 1890s or early 1900s, because it is really a kind of socio-historical analysis of laughter in relation to hysteria. The two terms are always in kind of dialectical confrontation with one another. So just briefly go through part 3, and then maybe we can chat about it a little bit more, because we're all here for cinema. This apparently isn't an archival Hysteria conference, but here we are. So chapter 7 is the outtake from the previous book on comedy, and it's about archiving women's laughter as early film spectators in the late 19th and early 20th century. So going through trade press reviews in which early film comedies, slapstick comedies, were frequently advertised by the duration of laughter that it provoked. Like comedies would be described as 250 feet of nonstop laughter, right? Like, I mean, the film reel should have just been priced by the duration of the laugh. And women were, overwhelmingly, film exhibitors knew what side their bread was buttered on, and it was female enjoyment, right? Like, if you couldn't get women into the theater, your comedy doesn't have a chance. So I'm kind of going through these trade press reviews, also listening to phonograph records, like the Sally Strumbler, The Laughing Girl, phonograph recordings of women's laughter. People would just go, oh yeah, don't read novels because it will have you admitted to a mental asylum. I think that's from the archives of a mental asylum in West Virginia, though they wouldn't answer any of my emails. That's getting us into chapter 8. So yeah, I also make up an allegorical unruly female film spectator named Madame Medusa, who kind of flits in and out throughout the book. This is roughly a likeness of Madame Medusa on my t-shirt. And then chapter 8 actually pivots if chapter 7 is about this hysterical laughter as a euphemism for jouissance or overwhelming pleasure, looking at women spectators at the movies. In chapter 8, I actually focus on film exhibition in mental asylums in the US in the early 20th century, because there was all of this hype about cinema as a universal visual cure to not just female hysteria, but to like madness as a kind of blanket diagnosis. And the US federal government earmarked hundreds of thousands of dollars in the first decades of the 20th century to build movie theaters in mental asylums amid this kind of all of this clamoring for progressive reform, because these asylums were like dens of utter misery. They were in no way equipped to care for their patient population. So the idea was, just throw a slapstick comedy on the screen and that'll cure them. But there were more kind of intriguing neurological theories to sort of justify this expediency of installing, motion picture projectors in asylums instead of actually providing adequate care for patients. There was this notion of a kind of reciprocity or even mirroring between the madcap procession of illusions in early film representation and the kind of inner life or inner experience of neurodivergent subjectivity. Like if you're suffering from delusions and hallucinations, and I don't know, you go watch Emile Cole's Enchanted Spectacles, somehow the kind of radical confrontation between the two, between neurodivergent subjectivity and trick cinematography will cancel each other out and square the circle. And the writings on these theories on cinema as a visual cure to madness are wild. So that's kind of the lay of the land of chapter 8. And I also sort of look at neurologists like Arthur Van Gehoekten and Camilo Negro, who use cinematography as a research tool for kind of capturing and studying patients' unruly escalation of symptoms in a way that sort of defied photographic capture or still photography, like patients with motion disorders, involuntary gait movements, that kind of thing. And then finally in chapter 9 out of the book, which has 9 chapters, we look at the films themselves. So chapter 9 is about the popularity of representations of women themselves laughing hysterically on screen. So a lot of the kind of wayward cast of characters from cinema's first Nasty Women. Shout out to my co-conspirators, Laura and Alif, who are in the room. And there was a popular convention that's probably familiar to everyone in this room, and it's somewhere in the slideshow, not here though, this is another obituary, of beginning and or ending a film with a close-up or medium close-up of, oh yeah, that's, okay, I'll just get distracted if I try to talk to the actual clips, of a close-up or medium close-up kind of bookending the film of the lead character, lead performers kind of laughing, winking, making funny faces, you know, raising a ruckus while directly addressing the spectator. And Noel Birch calls this the emblematic shot. It's kind of spawned from the early film genre of funny facials, right? Close-ups of characters making funny facial expressions. So I look at the popularity and even the contagion of representing close-ups of women laughing hysterically directly at the spectator at the beginning and or end of the film, like Leontine, Bertha Augustus, in Laughing Gas, and thinking about the laughing madwoman or Madame Medusa as sort of, I don't know, a gateway or even a portal between the kind of emergent diegesis of the narrative film and the life world of the audience. So that's kind of where we land. I have a brief epilogue trying to kind of frame the resonances of these archives for boiling points around laughter, gender, and power politics today. Like there was a woman, Desiree Feruz, who was arrested and almost served over a year in jail for laughing out loud at Jeff Sessions' Senate confirmation hearings during the early months of the Trump era. And of course, a viral social media campaign in Turkey, hashtag of women posting funny sort of selfie videos of their inappropriate, unruly laughter after one of Erdogan's ministers tried to ban women from laughing out loud in public a few years ago. So I don't know, I feel like I just kind of hysterically omitted, I don't know, 20 minutes of plot description of my monograph. Maybe we can...
Yes. So
what time is it? Is it
no,
dinner yet?
you're good. You're good.
Okay.
You're good. No problem. I have a couple of questions, but since there's a lot already around here that I come to more, I'm sure there is few people that might have already some questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to have the first one. Don't be shy. I know you're not. There you go. Thank you.
The book is also a polemic against the humorless turn. No one's allowed to be funny anymore. All of the books and comedy studies are about things we're not supposed to laugh at.
So Maggie,
I enjoy things I actually find funny.
Maggie, this sounds like I'm a plant in the audience to have you talk about this, but I want you to talk about the op-ed that you wrote relating to your work to the contemporary American political scene, especially relating to Kamala Harris.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Thanks for the softball, Julie.
That's what I sound like.
I didn't even have to put my baseball mitt on. So yeah, last summer after Biden suspended his gaffe-ridden campaign and Kamala Harris became the sort of apparent nominee, Trump dubbed her laughing Kamala, kind of appealing to, I don't know, sexist and racist tropes of women's laughter as sort of like shrill, overbearing, you know, like a sign of her irrationality and unfitness for office. And I wrote a little op-ed in the esteemed newspaper, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, called hashtag Make America Laugh Again, which was going viral on social media at the time. You know, now I have a t-shirt. I'm not wearing it today because I wanted to wear Medusa, but it's, you know, like says hashtag, yeah, Kamala, right? Because Mala, Make America Laugh Again, is part of the, you know, an acronym contained in her first name. And it was a moment of joy. I feel like myself, but a lot of people were in a state of despair. Trump's reelection felt inevitable. Politics was the opposite of fun, you know, like it was the last thing I wanted to think about because it would just like plunge me into a state of deep melancholia. And it was a moment, I don't know, I felt a strange surge of hope when this happened. And people were having a lot of fun with it. Like Kamala Harris does have a really joyful, wonderful laugh, and her laughter is actually very rarely motivated by comedy or an actual joke or even like specifically legible context, right? There are all of these sort of like montage mashups of her just sort of like laughing for no reason, making its way across the internet, and they were really fun to watch, and it totally changed the whole affective and political mood in America. And I don't know, it was just like a breath of fresh air. It was like taking off a whalebone corset that you'd been wearing for over a century and finally breathing. I don't know, my feelings are different now. I'm still desperate for Trump not to be reelected. You know, I'm like wearing my watermelon earrings, so I'll say my my feelings about the kind of larger political stakes and significance of what Harris's laughter means maybe are no longer quite as optimistic in terms of like, you know, the scale of change we need in the world and what is actually imaginable at this historical juncture within this, you know, kind of political systems that we have. But maybe, I don't know, you were asking me about laughter and I took it in a different direction. I have a piece on this coming out in the LA Review of Books, so I'll just, you know, I won't scoop my own article.
If this was not an icebreaker, I don't know what it is. So other question, any other question, or somebody else has something to add or ask? Because I do, so maybe I do. Well, there's many things. One of the things is, for example, I found a very interesting quote that you could hear about Matilde Serrao, so which is a very interesting figure, difficult for some way for us in Italy, but yet, and I will find it, yes, because she mentioned the idea of spettatrice in 1916. And she said...
What's the page number? Let me
page,
follow.
yeah, 191, actually, if you want to read it, even better.
I haven't committed my entire book to memory yet.
You do not?
Give it time.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah,
You see the quote? No, go for it if you prefer.
No, you're
Okay,
asking a question.
yeah. So she said, she's talking about the spettatrice and say, in 1916, observe it, the curious, even anxious crowd created by cinema, which were full to bursting more than ever. So already in 1916, that was something that, you know, crossed their mind in the idea of this bursting feeling, this explosive idea. And it's very interesting, the point of view that she gives, because if you read reviews of movies that, of course, were mainly from, you know, Italian journalists of the era, especially in 1916, where the Italian movies was big deal, there is never such mention of powerful energy, of the idea of this powerful energy. In that sense, it could be like, oh, the beautiful diva, decadent, or something was either very serious, and if it wasn't serious, it was never taken seriously, at least in Italy, despite the fact that we have very good comedians at the beginning. So that's why I found particularly interesting the idea that she, in 1916, thinks how cinema, how the people are ready to laugh and enjoying in a way that is, again, explosive, therefore inappropriate, definitely inappropriate for the society, and particularly even later on, of course, in Italian society. So again, my idea is how much or how many references do you find on the idea of being you already mentioned it, inappropriate, the idea of laughing in a way that is not to be appropriate, and how important was also to make it very clear, loud, and be allowed to be inappropriate in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine line, right? Like, be inappropriate insofar as it sells tickets and, you know, becomes a gimmick that lures people into the theater, but not so much so that it actually is threatening to, you know, like the power structures that exist in society. So I think in this quote that you pointed to, Matilde Serrao is deeply ambivalent about laughter and the kind of affective contagion that's exploding in the movie theater and other sort of public spaces in which women are becoming integrated, both in their leisure and recreation and enjoyment, but also their political participation. So I think, right, like mass culture is very, very ambivalent about what it wanted from the sort of I don't know, liberation of female enjoyment. Because, and it's all over the trade press reviews, right? Like, I found one story about a woman who laughed so loudly and uncontainably that she brought her infant to the movie. It caused her baby to start to cry, and then if her laughter didn't annoy the spectators around her, her baby's hysterical sobbing did. So it's like, what is the line between, I don't know, laughter that sort of greases the wheels of pleasure, right? That sort of contagious euphoria of watching a comedy in cahoots with an audience, right? Comedy is a very bodily embodied genre. And when laughter becomes disruptive, and actually just, like laughing off cue, laughing too loudly so no one can concentrate on their own laughter, or when you laugh at a joke that people around you don't find funny. So I think that's part of what's going on. But in almost all of the materials I found, it's not just this sort of like seamless recuperation of women's unruly laughter, end of story. It's always very ambivalent. And laughter still has that threat. It still has teeth. It's still, especially when it overpowers comedy,
Absolutely.
when comedy can't explain its meaning.
Is there another question or some question? Because I have another one, the last one, at least from my side, and we can also come back at the end. Okay. Last one for now. No, you were mentioning the end, the last chapter of the book, and the laughing phase. So again, I was wondering, especially also for the programming and so on. I mean, what you notice, and you also saying how important is that you go. You need, you mentioned the scaffolding to hold. That's why the movies are at the end. Otherwise, it will be. It is about the movie, but it goes. They need like to. A containing form, like to have the idea to get there at the end, definitely. So they make me think a lot how that, as we see even now, the
Leontine.
yes. So
She just flooded her house.
exactly, and enjoying that. Of
She
course,
looks like she's having a good time.
She's having a good time, but that's the thing. She's definitely relating to the public, and as you said, his laughing face is definitely like her on the screen. And so I wonder if there was any mention or specific mention of audience in general appreciating this kind of connection. So the fact that at the end or in certain part of the movies, usually at the end, there was one of the actors that were, like talking directly to the public in a way, or just being specifically for the public in that sense. So there was some note or something that was noted at the time. Also because you were mentioning that it was very important to bring women to cinema, otherwise your comedy will not work.
Yeah. No, less so. I mean, usually laughter is decontextualized when it's mentioned in, I don't know, trade press reviews. It's just like, a referendum on like whether the film itself is funny, but it's less like they rarely do I find laughter mentioned in the context of a specific gag, let alone like, oh, Leontine flooded the house and all of the women in the audience were howling. Though there was one, film, I forget the film in the title. I talk about maybe like 700 films in this book, most of which are no longer extant. But it's like, I call it archival rag picking in one instance. I have this notion of hysteria historiography as a kind of methodology, which maybe we could unpack comparatively later if there's time at the end. But there was one example of a film that was specifically not a comedy where it was a public health film. A woman had given birth, and I don't even remember the exact example, but it was just something about the man, her husband, doing something like, I don't know, kind of clueless. And the article noted that all of the women in the audience found that uproariously funny and sort of laughed inappropriately. And the reporter was very puzzled as to why. And his theory was, oh, maybe because he's a husband. And I think that's a direct quote from the article.
We have a question from the public online.
Oh, wow.
Yay!
Rodney Stewart Hillel Treister. 2 questions. How much did the number of reports about women outnumber those of men? And what differed in the way they were reported? So I'm not sure if this is specifically about the obituaries. I found almost no obituaries for men who allegedly died from laughing too hard. And if they did, it was because they were neurasthenic or in some way or another implicitly feminized. Men died of anger, rage, or other sort of more agential emotions. Women died of sadness, grief, sometimes fear, but predominantly laughter. But I think in the context of the trade press reviews, laughter, if it's gendered at all, it's in the context of femininity. Otherwise, it's just sort of blanketly universalized, right? Like it's never specified, oh, like these men in the audience laughed their heads off. B, to what extent were you able to verify the reports, especially the more outrageous ones? I looked for coroner's reports. I tried to match, because there were names in the obituaries, and sometimes I'd find the exact same obituary verbatim, mourning the death of women in different locations with completely different names, with like slightly altered details, like a different joke that they had allegedly laughed lethally at. So I haven't really, empirically, I haven't verified any of them, but I don't really think any of them are true. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we can stop now and maybe go back to some either. Oh, there is the last one.
What?
The dentist joke.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If anyone needs to step out of the room, now is the time to
Now is when.
Yeah. The Giornate del Cinema Muto assumes no
No,
legal, financial,
absolutely.
or
No
medical
obligation.
responsibility. And this was a joke told to a woman named Barbara Barr in 1908 by her sweetheart, who was a noted wit. He was known for his sense of wit around the town. So a man went to the dentist to have a tooth pulled. The dentist pulled out his tooth and it hurt. And the man said, "Oh, doctor, if only humans were born without teeth." And the dentist said, "We are, you know."
Uh-oh. I don't know if you can keep on now. It's dangerous already. I feel the danger coming. Thank you, Maggie. So in the meantime, I do a brief, quickly change. And here we go. Okay, so we're gonna change subject, but not really ish. Well, I mean, we are, there's definitely cross path in between, so that's gonna be interesting. I want to thank Yiman Wang to be with us today, and well, actually, I'm gonna leave you because we agreed to have some slides, but also as with Maggie and so. If you have any question, we will have some times, but just as an introduction, I think is good to have an idea about the book that you can find here, the beautiful book, actually. You can see it here as well. And as you know, we have a small but substantial program this year on Anime Wong, which are extremely happy about. But there's so much more to what we see, even just what we see on the screen. And that's why the book is amazing. And for many contents. But so, how do you start interesting on the subject or Anime Wang in general?
Yeah, well, thank you, Paolo, so much for hosting the conversation, and thank you, Maggie, for such a wonderful, uproarious staging for what's coming, which is really hard to follow. And thank you, audience, for staying here. And I would say my relationship with Anime Wong and with it, which turns out to be this book, went back to about 20 years ago when I was finishing up my PhD degree, and I was supposed to transform my dissertation into my first book. And as advised by everyone senior who's telling me that I should stay away from my dissertation for some time to work on a different project. So then Anime Wong intrigued me because she was a border crossing figure. And that's what I have been always interested in. She crossed the Pacific and the Atlantic in the 1920s, 1930s, and made her name in Europe during the two wars. So that's what initially got me interested in her. I even fantasized that I would write my Anime One book as my tenure book, which is the first book, because I thought Anime One didn't do that much. She had a short career. I could just have a fling and then throw this book. And then, of course, my senior colleagues advised me that, you got to do more research. It's better that, basically sit down, write your first book, which is based on your dissertation, and then you spend your time write your Anime One book, which is what I ended up doing. And then it took me 20 years to do actually the research, and then to put out this book. Because she traveled so much in different European countries, including Italy. She played on the stage extensively in a number of Italian cities, as well as other places like in Germany, in Norway, in Sweden, in the UK, and France. Right. So I literally followed in her footsteps for so many years before I was able to actually try to piece together archives from different locations. But then when I had those materials, or in the process of digesting those materials, I felt actually pretty lost. Other than that, I continue to be intrigued by her border crossing efforts, but I needed something to actually galvanize the materials. And then I found this quote by her in 1939. It was on the brink when she traveled to Australia to again perform on the stage. And before she arrived in Australia, she had this interview with a Sydney newspaper in which it says, and brace for this, it's nothing to laugh at. Quote, "People insist on looking at me as a freak, something akin to a 5-legged dog or a 2-headed calf. I want to be an actress." This is where my book title comes from. I want to be an actress, not a freak. "I want to feel that people go to see my pictures because I perform well, not just because I am an Oriental," end quote. So I sort of, having read Maggie's book and listened to you talking through the book, I feel like my book can actually be retitled "Death by Melodrama." And the reason is that she dies many, many times, reiteratively across her career. And instead of interpreting that kind of death as we have always been doing, that is, she's a victim of her time, which there's no doubt about it, right? But I think it's more important to think about the genre, the predominant genre that she plays in, which is melodrama, which is always about failed relationship between her and a white guy, the protagonist, right? So instead of thinking of her as only the victim, I want to think about, or the victim of the politics at the time, I also want to think of her as being victimized by the melodrama genre itself, because melodrama dictates that she, as the disposable second woman, meaning the woman of color, has to die. But then on top of this, I really want to think about what she is able to bring to the table to transform this kind of script. So that sort of becomes the very beginning of my book. And then in terms of the structure of the book, I think of this as a mosaic kind of structure, or sort of racking the focus. And by mosaic, I mean that when you look at a mosaic artifact, it has so many facets. And then if you stand at the distance, you sort of see the pattern of the mosaic. But then when you come close, every facet counts. And this facet is not subsumed to the overall pattern. And that's how I come to understand Anime Wong's life career. So when I look at her, as I rack the focus, I look at her in the margins as not the leading lady, not the star, as we have seen in Ding Li and Driven from Home, right? me as the fangirl really has to wait and wait and wait for her to appear, right? But then does that mean she's not important? Well, if we say so, then the majority of her performance is actually in the margins and in the background, even off the screen on the set, right? So I really want to come up with a method of thinking about that kind of mosaic kind of structure. It matters even when she's in the margins. And that facet is important. And it's important because it's not to be subsumed to the macro narrative of her being the star, right? So that's where I sort of pivot from her stardom to her career as a performer worker. And that also allows me to think of her as a migratory performer worker. So the border crossing itself does not simply contribute to her cosmopolitanism, but it is conducted out of necessity because she needed to go around the world to look for work opportunities. So that's where her stardom, as we have been wanting to fantasize about, morphs into her migratory worker performer or performer worker status. And then I sort of closed the book by re-evoking her, having her coming back in the refrain. Instead of a conclusion, I have a refrain. And by that refrain, I sort of resist the chronology or the teleological chronology of you go from A to B, and now she's in the past. I want her to come back to the present in the refrain. So in the refrain, I sort of try to think about that she actually had a career as a comedian, and she actually was, in all her interviews, she was incredibly vociferous and witty. And then in her very rare comedic performances, she was very infectious, right? So I wanted to call her back in the refrain as a comedian and think about the importance of, the wit that's built into the kind of tragic melodrama that she had to reenact again and again. So that's sort of like the overall plot of the book, which is to say that I kind of think of this as the flip side of Maggie's coin.
Maybe I'm gonna. This.
Yeah, so this is Anime Wong according to Google, that we see her as the dragon lady, the baby that turns into a dragon lady. Then she turns into this face on the quarter coin, released in the US in 2022. And then last year she became a dragon, not a dragon doll, a Barbie doll. Yeah. And then that's a book with a table of contents. You can see what I try to do in this content is to go to start from the center stage and then to drag the focus and to go to the background and the margins and to think about what happens when she was excluded from, say, a number of pictures. But the most scandalous one was The Good Earth, MGM's mega production. And then what happens after she was excluded. And then the chapter 5 was about her legacy for contemporary Asian American or ethnic Asian filmmakers and scholars. And finally, I have the refrain. Yeah, so basically this is about what I try to do, to go behind the scenes to think about, basically deconstructing the idea of stardom, deconstructing easy cosmopolitanism, and to think about the performer worker, the labor side of it, and what she brings to the table. Yeah, so we can just, these are the sub points of all of these, and we can quickly go through this. Yeah, so we can click. And that's a lithographic map that she made about her travels in the UK in 1934. And you can see the thumbnails, and she basically visually recorded where she was on the stage and doing films. And she, if you look into the detail, she even has her dresses on, and also the means of transportation by the boat or by train and all of that. I thought it was just so much fun that she, and then this is actually a greeting card, a New Year's greeting card with her Chinese signature. So then this is being held in the Britain now, in the UK now, but you can imagine this as a greeting card. This is another concept of the book, that I think of her address to her not only contemporaneous audience, but also the public in different locations as her greetings to the world. And then this becomes an emblem of her greetings to the world. Yeah, so those are one example of me going behind the screen to think about her. On the stage, we see her as the Dragon Lady, and then the costume is still on exhibition in New York, I believe. And then on the set, she was being filmed. This is the Limehouse Blues 1934 film. Obviously stereotypical, she was playing the Dragon Lady, but then we see her playing on the set. And then if we keep going, we see her rehearsing the dance with Leroy Prince. And then at the hem of her shorts, you can see a character, which is Shuang, which is the last name of a character, Wong, because her Chinese name spelled as Wang Liu Song. So the character references the last character of her name. And that's another way that I theorize her signature performances, both literal but also figural. She places her signature pretty much all over her body and on the screen. So some of the things that I do in chapter 1, I talk about her thousandth death, which is how she dubbed herself. She says, when I die, my epigraph should say, here lies a woman who has died 1,000 times. So this has been seen as her victimization by her times. But like I said earlier, I really want to think about what she brings to the table by dying repetitively, because a lot of the press at the time would say that, she is made for the role because as an Oriental, she can naturally die beautifully. Purportedly, she was also hired when a white actress is to play an Oriental role in Yellow Face. She purportedly was hired to coach the white actress how to die Oriental way. But I want to think about the labor that goes into her 1,000th death. And then here I references the idea of disidentification, Jose idea of disidentification, thinking about this kind of death really as death acts rather than any kind of authentic Orientalist expression. And then the second red point is sartorial signature performances. We can see some visuals later. And the third red line is from character cat to character actress, which in some ways I really had fun writing because of the cat part. And I really try to bring out the connections, how she, we can move on and then think about that. Yeah, so the labor, here's where I talk about her 1,000th death, Tier 4 death acts, but then also to continue what Maggie was already talking about, if we think about her having to die again and again, and she herself has plenty of protest and complaint about this kind of melodramatic arrangement, but then she keeps doing it, right? So I want to think about what is the kind of pleasure that might be possible for her on the screen to die again and again. And here I references Josephine Lee, who is an Asian American theater critic, and thinking about the implicit or complicit pleasure that Asian American actors can claim in rapport with, similarly marginalized audience when you are able to put on the show of death in such a perfect manner. So here are some of the visuals of her dying beautifully. This is from Song, the German film that we're going to see in the festival. Yeah, and this is from 1938, Dangerous to Know, which is a crime thriller. And here she kills herself after 13, according to publicity, even though it's presented as a beautiful, perfect death. But the publicity says that she had to stab herself 13 times or 18 times in order to come to this perfection of death. So that's an opportunity for me to think about the rehearsal process and the labor that goes, emotional and physical labor that goes into the death process. And then it shows up on the magazine, this very popular Look magazine. As you can see at the bottom, on the one hand, the image shows that she's dying in these bold colors, and then the bottom says, "World's most beautiful Chinese girl." See page 36. So beauty and death, at least the Oriental beauty and Oriental death, are seen as being intertwined with each other. The rehash of the Madame Butterfly trope. Yeah, so then she keeps dying until she dies a physical death, and you see her grave here, gravestone here. So then the other point that I wanted to make was her signature sartorial performance. You see her in the 1934 film Limehouse Blues, and then the top center, you see her on a public occasion, 1941. It's the celebration of Chinese Mid-Autumn or the Moon Festival, where she was among this parade for the fundraising for the war in China against Japan. And in the center bottom is 1935, Colvin Vacton's set of photos of her in the same costume. And then top right, it's 1941, Ellery Queen's Penthouse film. She wears the same dress again. And the bottom, 1942, Lady from Chongqing. So you see how across the decades, and this is not the only example and not only visual, there are places where she does the vocal performance of a Chinese poem in her Taishan dialect, and she does that chanting again across 3 decades. So in some ways, when we put these dots together, we have this dotted line, which allows us to really think about how she very conscientiously built up her reiterative authorship or signature performance. And now this point from character cat to character actress. And the example that I'm using here is a 1960 film. It's a film noir, Portrait in Black. It's a Lana Turner star vehicle. So on the top left, you see the image of at the beginning of the film. She is playing a minor character, a maid dressed in this black, sort of more maid-like kind of costume or dress. And she, in the front, Lana Turner and the family friend is talking in the foreground, and then it's all Technicolor, but then Anime Wong in this black dress sort of just flits across in the background. And actually I became intrigued by the flitting across the background, also because of a story that was told to me by when I was giving a talk on Anime Wong at in Milwaukee. And after my talk, a person in the audience came up to me and she says, "Oh, I have a childhood friend who grew up in Iran, American family grew up in Iran in the military." And then there were old movies being shown by the American military in Iran, and her father is a big fan of these oldies. And one day they were watching these oldies on TV. All of a sudden, the father shouted out, "Oh, that's Anime Wong!" And then all the family members turned to the screen. But Anime Wong was a fleeting figure. When she turned to the screen, she was gone. And then that became this family joke that everyone, the father knows something, but nobody else knows. So it's Anime Wong becomes this family joke. So I became so intrigued by her as the fleeting figure across the background. So here you see her flitting across in Portrait in Black, and as you will see in so many other films where she plays the supporting character. And then in the bottom, it's toward the sort of still the 1/3 into the film, Anime Wong shows up in this extravagant black and white costume, imperial costume at the bottom of the stairs, holding a Siamese cat. You can probably see the glaring eyes of the cat. So what's really interesting is that the cat was cast. There was a casting call for the cat actor. Basically, again, this is in the press book, so all of this could be stunt, right? So, but still, even within the stunt, it's very intriguing to trace the connections. So the casting call essentially says we're looking for a dramatic actor, cat, something like a 4-footed Marlon Brando, not not a rhubarb kind of cat, right? So, and then shortly after the casting call, the press book says Lana Turner actually has a cat phobia. So the most difficult scene for her in the film is that she has to pick up this cat in the room and then goes to the top of the staircase and drops off the cat. The cat's name is Raja. So then in the middle picture, you see that Lana Turner drops off the cat and Raja walks down all the way to Anime Wong at the bottom of the staircase, and Anime Wong picks up the cat. And then that becomes really interesting because in 1952, so that was about 8 years ago, or 54, I can't quite remember clear. But anyways, about 6 to 8 years ago, she wrote a letter to Colvin Vecton and Fania Marinoff, the photographer couple based in New York. And in the letter, she said that she inherited a cat whose name is Boo Boo. Obviously, she renamed the cat Boo Boo. And she says, and it's a Siamese cat. And she says this Siamese cat is almost like a human. The cat surprises her. And then shortly after that, she calls the cat a character cat. And then shortly after that, Anime Wong started to venture into television because her movie opportunities were really drying up. So she ventured into television, and she had some, ostensibly add-on Orientalist roles, which is not something to write home about, right? But then she commented on these add-on roles, and she says she actually enjoys becoming a character. She enjoys playing these character parts because it requires imagination for you to really feel at home with these kinds of add-on roles, right? So I think there is a really interesting connection there between she naming the cat, she calls the cat a character cat, and then realizing she herself was transforming into a character actress to, 7 years later, now in this film, she is co-playing with Boo Boo, the Siamese cat, essentially upending the white drama in the center. So the larger narrative in this chapter, which is about her playing minor roles, is how she co-plays with non-human characters and also with the decor, the very Orientalist kind of decor in the film to sort of overwhelm the white drama in the middle. And so you see how Lana Turner, by the end of the scene, literally just retreats into her own bedroom because the whole house feels unsafe for her anymore. So that was a lot of fun to write. Yeah. And then finally, the refrain, I call her back as a comedian. So on the left, you see an image from her. It's a very short episode, or like episode in the 1930 Elstree Calling, the British review sound film. So it's a setup of Mary Pickford's Taming of the Shrew, and here she plays the shrew in the costume that she already wears in Piccadilly. It's the same costume, so she reiterates again the costume 2 years later, but she plays this Taishanese spouting shoe and throwing this cake, at everyone who shows up in front of her, including when Shakespeare comes up. She throws this cake on Shakespeare persona, and his toupee gets thrown off, and then so it's a whole deconstruction of this white authorship in some ways. And then in the right, you see an image. It's a keyhole, kind of like a keyhole point of view image of one of her 1927 short comedy by Hal Roach, produced by Hal Roach, called Honorable Mr. Bugs. Here you see how she's doing the slapstick kind of stunt. So hopefully we'll be able to show this film next time in Pordenone.
Didn't you say, isn't the vignette directed by Alfred Hitchcock?
Yeah. the early work. So finally, which I thought was, again, thanks to the Pananoni, thanks to Jay for putting up this big panorama poster of Anime Wong from Pavement Butterfly, which you're also going to see. And as you can see that here, if you look at the original poster, she looks very forlorn. She's lost on the pavement. She's again abandoned by the white guy. Where does she go? It's kind of a pathos-laden melodrama, tragedy all over again. But she has this downcast eye. So I sneaked in my book, and I'm hoping that, after our 20-year working relationship, that she sees my book and she will read it and let me know what she thinks.
Thank you. Again, I have a couple of questions already, but are there any already question, comments, or something on the book? Oh, yep.
Thank you. I look forward to reading it. The structure of the organization is very creative and kind of exciting. So I'd like to find out more about that. I don't really have a question. I just thought I would share an anecdote. About 10 years ago, the UCLA Film Archive had an Anime Wong retrospective.
Mm-hmm.
And we were both there. My wife and me were both there. And many of her descendants were invited guests to that, including, I think it was her son, who was like about 80 years old or something.
Wait, whose descendants? Anime Wong's?
And Anime Wong's
She
children.
She has a niece. She has no children of her own.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was her relatives. And
She has a
one of them
niece.
was an old man.
Mm.
And then the youngest one was like 10 years old or something. There were about a dozen of the relatives there. And they had not seen this film before, and I don't think they had seen many of her films at all, because back then you would have to really search them out. And it was just an amazing emotional experience to see the members of the family see their relative on the screen like this. So I've remembered that night for a long time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, for the description. I can vividly imagine how emotional an experience that is for the family members. Yeah. Thank you.
Are there any others? Comments or question? In the meantime, I have several, maybe too many, but still. What you also find in the book, and you mentioned as well, was her traveling. That was not just for pleasure at all. There were shows in Europe, and as a matter of fact, you find also in your research that she was singing songs in Chinese. She was singing songs in English, but also in French, and even in some case in Danish. So
Italian as well.
Yes, Italian as well. You're right. Then again, what I really appreciate a lot about the book is this: that you find so many, as you were talking about the mosaics, how the complexity is really escaping us, of the actors. What do you feel of this? Was the impact of this being international in the real sense of meaning was in her works and in general life? You show us the beautiful card that was really amazing. So you think there was a long connection in that, being also difficult for her working in the US anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So going back to the notion of the performer, or the migratory performer worker, right? So yes, the necessity is that she has to travel around the world to look for opportunities. And but what came out for her is that also it's not a totally passive thing, because for her, one of the concepts that I developed in this book is anachronotope. So what I mean by that chronotope means basically time and space, and then I put the prefix Anna in front of it, sort of joke, in sideways, kind of like reference to her name, Anna May Wong, right? But also Anna means reverse or out of sync, right? So I want to think about how her basically think against a kind of teleological chronology, and to think about how her traveling around does not mean that she constantly moves closer and closer to cosmopolitanism or stardom. Rather, these are the necessity, but also the opportunities for her to learn new skills and to regroup and to recharge, and sometimes just to tune off. And here I also reference Lauren Berland's idea of the episodic career, where they talk about the necessity for people who are violated against and people who are marginalized. They necessarily need to tune off, and to they compare it to a switchboard, just switch off, right? So I sort of imagine her going to different places as opportunities or desires to get away from something that she becomes so fed up with. And then in this new place, and that's where she describes her own career really pithy, in a very pithy way. She says that she had these multiple beginnings of a career. Her first beginning, these are her original words, her first beginning was 1919 when she actually ventured into Hollywood. Second beginning was in Europe when she arrived in 1928 and stayed until 1930. Third beginning was after she returned from her China trip in 1936, right? So for her, it's about all this episodic understanding of her going back and forth and going to different places and acquiring new skills and learning about film and other entertainment industries in different contexts, and then trying to sort of compare them and exchange with artists around the world. And she actively sought out, when she was in UK, the map, the lithographic map that you saw. She was performing in different places, and at the same time, so for instance, she was corresponding with Orientalist scholar. How do you say? A scholar of the Eastern culture or whatever. His name is Henry Farmer. And so she reached out to Henry Farmer, basically tried to commission him to write her numbers, the song numbers for her performance in Chu Jing Chao. And then she also says that, she would like to try to bring or get Chu Jing Chao production team to bring Henry Farmer to London to make this film. And then she says, if all of this fails, and then I will still try to use the song number you write for me for my other performances, right? So she travels around and she really seeks out resources available to her and try to make all the different connections. So that's where I think, it's both about retraining, it's both about regrouping, trying to come back, but at the same time also to get into a different mode of working and to re-begin everything all over again. Yeah.
There is also a beautiful photo amongst the many in which she is with Leni Riefenstahl, with Marlene Dietrich.
Yeah.
And the comment on that is also really crazy, but also give you a perspective that as losers for so long, how she was really connected, also in Europe, in Germany, but all the places she visited, really to the star system and the connection she has, despite what that photo was used later on for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that set of photos of the female trail, that's how I call them, the female trail, in the Berlin Ball, has been, film scholar Patrice Petrol also wrote about those photographs. So they're really important for thinking about the Weimar period and how these Anne Wong actually at the time was the most well-known actress. Marlene Dietrich and Leni Riefenstahl, they're both up and coming. So one could really write a lot about those photos, the way they pose themselves, the way they relate to each other physically, like bodily relate to each other. That actually is extremely interesting. But then, as you were saying, by 1937 or something, this photo recurs in an American magazine, literally with the three women torn apart. Essentially, the headlining says that Hitler is tearing the three women apart, and so that they cannot be together anymore. And along with that, obviously, Anime Wong also lost her opportunity to come back to Germany to play on the stage or on the screen. And there's some more, there is actually one interesting story, which is there is a English version of it, and then there's a Chinese version of it, recounting Anime Wong's relationship with Nazi Germany. So the English version basically says that Anime Wong refused a nose job. She refused to have a plastic surgery conducted to acquire this Teutonic nose in order to perform. So she lost that opportunity. But then the Chinese narrative of the same incident, or I don't know even if this is an actual incident, or if it's just the discursive imagination of her position in relation to Nazi Germany. But the Chinese version basically said, Anime Wong betrays China or betrays the Chinese race all over again because she gets blood transfusion, the ionic blood transfusion. She wants to become German, and she's pandering to the white desire again. So that's a sort of dis-ease or discomfort, frustration that she really had to struggle with throughout her life, being disowned essentially from left and right.
Yes, this was my following question as well, because you would expect that kind of fame, even if it was difficult, and again, as you said, sometimes in the background or so, but it lasted so long, it was so important, it wouldn't be recognized in China. But you say absolutely not, because what she was embodying in that moment, in that, their performance and so was exactly the opposite in a way. And all the review, also the lack of review particularly, but also the reviews of a trip to China, they're also indicative of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So her trip to China in 1936, the reception was actually very bifurcated. There were people, she did have a large fan base in China because she was a model. She was perceived as a emblem of the modern girl, right? So she does have a large fan base. But at the same time, she is criticized for performing roles that are considered to be demeaning to the Chinese dignity. But the implicit discourse is that there is only one way to represent China. And this woman who is ethnically Chinese but born and raised in Los Angeles somehow is tasked to represent China the way that the Chinese government wants to be represented. That's a kind of burden of representation that she sometimes sort of subscribed to, especially after 1936, her China trip. She sort of indicated that she went to China because she wanted to learn about the real China so that she can present China, especially Chinese femininity, more positively to the American audience. But on the other hand, things are actually more interesting than simply stepping into that prescribed role, because, I have examples in my book where I analyze that she very subtly satirizes the kind of patriarchal nationalism in China. Yeah, even through her language, because her ancestral language is Taishanese, which is unrecognized in China when the national language was stipulated as Mandarin Chinese, right? So her Taishanese becomes, this stigma point. Yeah.
And yet, and then I hope there's going to be at least one question. Otherwise I will keep on, and no problem. As you said also, and you notice also in the photos that are added, she's very proud of it. She's very proud of course, of her background, but in many ways she's so connected, as you just said, that even when she signed photos, she said, "Oriental yours," using both her signing or depending which way she's signing. And she's definitely connected to her own culture so much. So it must be such a clash that can definitely even psychologically make you feel inadequate because you are
Mhm.
crushed from both sides, and yet you have to be yourself, become strong with yourself and your belief.
Mhm.
So it is very very interesting how she read this clash and how she interpreted it also.
Yeah, absolutely. That I think in some ways that is a crux that I try to work through. The focal point that I try to work through in the book. So if we think about that kind of being disowned, the left and right, right? So we can say again to reiterate the victim discourse that that was a benighted time. There was no the category of Asian American identity did not exist for most part of our life, right? So then basically she did not have a label. She did not have a legit label to describe her situation of both Asian, Chinese, and American. There's no both and perk for her, right? So she ended up being neither nor, which is this negative, impossible position that nobody wants to be in, right? Because you literally has no way to feel belong or to identify with anything, right? So that's one way to think about it. But part of me also is just the way that I want to turn things upside down is to say that, well, maybe neither nor is not so bad. Maybe neither nor is precisely, in my first book, I have a chapter where I elaborated on the zone of the trans, TRANS, where I really think about the trans as not the conduit from A to B. There's no such teleology that guarantees the passage from A to B. Rather, the zone of the trans itself is the messy, sticky space where things are just uncertain and there is no guarantee or prediction of how things might go. So that trans idea also shapes my understanding of how Anime Wong could actually leverage the neither nor as a space where she disidentifies from the essentialist American identity and disidentify from the essentialist, the Chinese identity, right? And that I think that's the kind of critical distance that she maintains, whether out of necessity of being disowned or out of volition, right? We don't know. But I think what's important for me is that precisely that kind of discomfort that she bodily felt and psychologically felt with any of these kind of essentialist possibilities, right? Those are not possibilities for her. She had, her possibility is in the zone of trance where she just resists and refuses to easily identify with any kind of sloganing identity category.
I don't know if there is a last question and or comment. I know there will be after you read the book because I know most of you haven't got the chance yet.
Can I say something
Yes,
about this
please.
book cover?
Yes.
Yeah. So the book cover, in some ways, is deliberately non-anime Wong-esque because you don't see her face. You don't see her iconic visual here on the cover. Instead, this is actually a still from one of her fiction films made in London. And in this fiction film, at the beginning of the film, she literally holds up her hand. We know it's her hand because of the very characteristic fingers and the bangles and so on, right? So she literally holds up her hand and traces out her Chinese name from right to left in the classical Chinese way. So she writes her real name in the fiction film. So I found that to be really just an epitomization of what I want to argue about her signature performance, right? So it's not about her identifying with the fictional roles. It's more about sort of, for me at least, she reaches out to me, her greetings to me is, well, look at it. I'm not the role. I am what my name represents. Right? So the role is more like a charade for what I want to read, the charade for what she wants to put out on the screen or the stage.
Let me also add as the last things on the book that you also find QR codes inside, which are amazing because of all the dance and information and study there is, and you can watch the clip, which is also amazing because, as we know, as we always talk about, it's so difficult to find, and even if they're accessible online, doesn't mean they're easy to search or easy to find. So it is right on the spot when you need it, and it's great.
Thank you. And of course, if anybody fancy a physical copy, as we come to the theater to watch 35 millimeters, right? Even though for some of the films we have streaming digital version, but there is something specific, something really interesting, something really unique about 35 millimeter or 16 or 9.5 millimeter, the film print itself, right? So if anybody appreciates the feel of a physical book, it is available, I believe, at the book stand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you both. Thank you all for coming, and see you tomorrow for sure.
We should get a picture of us in our books.